You're listening to Big World Network.
Accidental Passion, Episode 12, Uncertain Futures, read by Meagan Hedin. Warning: although there is no material subject matter within that couldn't be found in any general bookstore with no age constraint, this series is rated 18 and contains adult situations and content. It is intended for mature audiences only and should not be read if you are uncomfortable with graphic sexual intimacy. The weather in Detroit had soured, and along with it, Kim's mood. She felt trapped in the house, listening as the rain pelted the windows and the cold wind that had brought in the weather howled and whistled. She couldn't help but long for the warm sun of Belize and the security of Ryan's arms again. She knew what was truly bothering her. Things had been moving so fast, and had become so exciting with the escape to the island, the exclusive time alone with Ryan, the wonderful lovemaking, and the terror of being pursued by Rick. Her life had become full of love and excitement, and she had felt so alive this last year since meeting Ryan, filling a void she had had for so long with Kevin. But with a couple days of not seeing Ryan, unable to talk much, and suddenly being apart after so much time together when the storm system rolled in, so had her gloomy mood. To make matters worse, Kevin had become even more rude and withdrawn than usual, making passive-aggressive comments at every opportunity, though he remained unwilling to actually discuss anything. If she had any guilt for her falling for Ryan, Kevin managed to fill her with so much anxiety and frustration that it had vanished with the sunshine. By late afternoon, with the wind and rain not showing any signs of letting up, Kim knew she had to get out of the house. Kevin was home with the boys, and when she informed him that she was going out, he barely grunted an acknowledgement and didn't even bother to ask where. As she entered the cold garage and got into her vehicle while the overhead door began to open, she didn't know where she was going. She only knew she had to get out for a bit. The suburban streets were mostly deserted with the storm, and were littered with wet leaves and small branches. She felt the wind blowing against her SUV as she drove, and her mind began racing with the events of the last year. She allowed herself to finally process the full scope of the danger she had put herself and everyone else in with her poor judgment of character with Rick. Had he really been that good at fooling her about the kind of man he was? Or had she just been so lonely, so desperate for the attention of a man that she was blind to any signs? She knew the answer, mixed with so many emotions and loneliness she had experienced in her life, and the emptiness and desperation that had caused her to put everyone at risk with her poor judgment. She began to sob. The darkness of the day, the realization of consequences from her decisions, her fortune of sitting by the most wonderful man she had ever known on that fateful flight, the addiction and emotional withdrawal of Kevin from her and the boys, the fear she had experienced with Rick, the friendship with Woods who had saved her life, and the emptiness at this moment, or, more appropriately, the need at this moment for the love of Ryan, all washed over her in a jumble of good and bad. It actually felt good to cry. Her life had experienced so much change, so much emotion, and so much love this past year, and for the first time it all came crashing down on her at once, as she continued driving with no real direction, at least, with no conscious direction. Alicia held Mary in her arms on their couch in silence as the rain fell outside their apartment. She gently soothed and stroked Mary's hair with her fingers, lightly kissing her forehead from time to time. Alicia didn't know what to do for Mary other than hold her, and anything she could think to say seemed pointless. The news from the doctor had been mixed. Mary wouldn't need a complete mastectomy, and her lymph nodes appeared to be clear. Had the lump not been discovered when it was, that probably wouldn't have been the case. But the news wasn't good from there. Mary's doctor had scheduled her for surgery to remove the lump, believing he wouldn't have to remove the breast unless the margins were larger than he anticipated. But it would be surgery nonetheless, and she would have to follow the surgery with several courses of radiation treatment. It was that part that concerned Alicia the most. Mary was always so beautiful and vibrant, full of energy, and she hated to think what the treatments would do to her, and how they would more than likely cause Mary to lose her hair among other side effects. In essence, the radiation was designed to poison any remaining cancerous cells while poisoning her entire body with the treatment in a dose designed to kill one before it killed the other. Alicia loved Mary so completely that the loss of hair wouldn't bother her, except that she knew how much it would bother Mary. And she could barely imagine the toll the treatments would take on Mary, sapping her energy and leaving her achy and nauseated. Alicia wanted to be there for Mary every minute, to support her and to love her. But Mary had become withdrawn these last few days. And to make things worse, nothing Alicia said to her seemed right, sounding only like empty words of encouragement. The hard truth was that the woman she loved had cancer, and it wasn't going to be an easy road to recovery. It wasn't until that afternoon that she had been able to connect with Mary in a meaningful way. As the rain and wind raged outside, Alicia had finally grabbed Mary's hand as she walked by her in their living room, and pulled her towards her. She had wrapped her arms around her lover, kissed her tenderly on the neck, and pulled her down to the couch with her, holding her tight. She sat in silence, gently stroking Mary's hair, allowing her love to speak for itself as they listened to the rain. Kim didn't know how, since she hadn't made a conscious decision to drive there, but she found herself outside of Ryan's building. She was cold and raw from the sobbing, and only wanted to feel his warm arms around her and feel safe in them. She knew it was wrong to barge in on him with no warning, and knew she would look pathetic. But she also knew she needed to feel his love again. It was all she had to hang on to. Climbing out of her SUV, having no umbrella, she was immediately soaked through by the cold, blowing rain. She knew with the wind that an umbrella wouldn't have made much difference anyway as she ran across the street, soaking her shoes in cold puddles which caused chills to shudder through her body. By the time she made it inside onto the door of his flat, her teeth were chattering. Knocking lightly on the door, Kim knew she must look hideous with running makeup from her crying, and her clothes and hair completely drenched from the cold rain. If he loved her now, seeing like this, he always would, she thought to herself. Ryan settled in his study with a warm fire crackling in the small fireplace as he stretched out on a leather couch in his jeans, sweatshirt, and warm socks with a draft from the current novel he was working on. Moments before, he had poured a glass of red wine and set it down on the coffee table along with a pen and a highlighter. The rain and wind seemed to disappear with the sound of the fire, and the jazz he had selected to play on his computer across the room at his desk. He had always loved these kinds of days in Detroit, enjoying the warmth and security from the raging environment outside, and found it to be the perfect sort of day for him to write. Fortunately, Detroit had no shortage of these kinds of days in the fall. After making it through just one page, he reached over to the table and lifted the wine glass and took a sip, allowing the red Merlot to roll across his tongue, savoring the acidic taste. As he set the glass back down, he heard a slight knocking on the door to his flat. Surprised, he instinctively looked at his watch and tried to remember if anyone had mentioned stopping by. Swinging his stockinged feet off the couch and back onto the floor, he stood up, plopped the draft he was working on onto the coffee table, and made his way into his living room to answer the door. When he opened the door, he was genuinely surprised and shocked to see a soaking wet, shivering Kim outside. Used to seeing her so put together, she looked so sad, so small and vulnerable at that moment. She looked up at him, dark runs of eyeliner around her red puffy eyes, water dripping off of her hair, and simply whispered, "I need you." Ryan reached out with his hand, and when she took it in his, he gently tugged her inside, not saying a word, and led her back into a study where the warm fire was burning. He knew she would speak when she needed to, but he also instinctively knew that she needed to be taken care of at that moment, and to be loved. When they were standing in front of the fireplace, he turned around to face her and began removing her soaking wet clothes, starting with her top, receiving no resistance from the shivering beauty in front of him. Layer by layer, he peeled the wet clothes from her, letting them fall to the floor in front of the fire, until removing the last two pieces, her bra and panties, both also soaking from the cold, blowing rain. She seemed so vulnerable in front of him, naked and cold. He instinctively wrapped his arms around her, pulling her cold body to his to share his warmth. Her skin felt damp and freezing, her nipples erect and lips blue. He kissed them lightly, and, leaving her by the fire for a moment, took a few steps over to the couch and pulled an afghan that was draped over it off, bringing it back to her naked body. He opened it up and draped it around over her shoulders to cover her body, and again pulled her tight to him to share his warmth, neither yet having spoken. After several moments in his arms, he reluctantly let go and walked to his bookshelf and grabbed another wine glass. As he poured Kim a glass, she moved away from the fire, her cold, naked body tightly wrapped in the afghan, and sat on the couch. When he handed her the glass, she took a long sip before setting it down on the coffee table. He sat down beside her, and as he leaned in to kiss her, she lay back against the sidearm and pulled him down to her, their feet swinging up on the couch. Her cool lips felt good against his own, as his tongue gently slipped between hers, tasting the red wine. With Kim showing no signs of wanting to end the kiss, he quickly found himself getting caught up in the moment of love and connection, forgetting the questions of what had brought her to his door, wet and obviously crying. There would be time later for talking, but for now it seemed she only wanted his love and warmth. Kim opened the Afghan to him, opening up her naked body to his. It was a unique experience being dressed, still in his jeans and sweatshirt, entwined with her completely naked body. Within moments, somehow, amidst the passion and love, still mostly clothed, he realized he was sliding into her, feeling her silky warmth surround his cock, and her arms on his back pulling him tight to her body, desperate for him to fill her and for them to connect.
This has been a presentation of Big World Network. Visit us on bigworldnetwork.com for more free weekly series, or follow us on Facebook and Twitter. Thanks for listening.
You're listening to Big World Network.